Welcome to Learn English with Sara. In today's story, we will travel back more than 2,000 years to meet a man who changed the way the world thinks, a man who did not command armies, own treasures, or build kingdoms but built something far more powerful: the human mind. His name is Plato, and his ideas shaped history, science, education, and even modern life. This is not just a biography. This is a story about truth, courage, and the journey of a soul searching for meaning. As you listen, you will not only improve your English, but also your way of thinking, just like Plato believed everyone should. Plato was born in Athens between 428 and 427 BCE. During a time when Athens was proud, powerful, and full of brilliant ideas. The city was known as the heart of philosophy, literature, and democracy. It was a place where poets wrote epics, sculptors carved beauty from stone, and thinkers met in public squares to debate life's biggest questions. But Athens was also a place of political conflict and hidden corruption where truth was often sacrificed for power. It was in this city of greatness and danger that Plato began his journey. Plato's family belonged to the upper class of Athens. His father, Aristotle, claimed royal ancestry, while his mother, Perictione, came from a noble line related to Solon, one of the most respected lawmakers in Greek history. From birth, Plato was surrounded by privilege, education, and influence. He grew up in a world where leadership, politics, and public life were expected. He could have become a powerful politician, a wealthy statesman, or a respected ruler, but his soul wanted something deeper. As a boy, Plato received the finest education available. He studied poetry, drama, gymnastics, mathematics, and music. But even as a child, he was different from others. While most students memorized lessons, Plato questioned everything. When he learned a fact, he wanted to know why it was true. When someone gave him an answer, he asked for proof. He explored meanings beyond words, thoughts beyond logic. His mind was hungry not for information, but for understanding. At first, Plato dreamed of becoming a poet or playwright. He loved language, rhythm, storytelling, and the power of ideas. He began writing poems and even entered writing competitions. But then something happened that changed his life forever and destroyed his faith in politics, power, and even human goodness for a time. When Plato was a teenager, a long and tragic war shook Greece: the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta that lasted 27 years. The war brought poverty, violence, and fear. Athens began to lose its strength and pride. Politicians became corrupt. Democracy turned chaotic. Justice disappeared. And those who had power controlled truth. Plato watched as his city fell into darkness not because of enemies, but because of ignorance, selfishness, and blind ambition. This experience broke something inside him. He began to question everything he once believed. If leaders could not be trusted, where could truth be found? If laws could be twisted, what was justice? If democracy could be used for evil, was it truly good? These questions led Plato toward philosophy not as a subject, but as a way of life. Around the age of 20, Plato met the man who would forever guide his destiny: Socrates. Socrates was unlike anyone Plato had ever met. He did not care about wealth or appearances. He walked barefoot, wore simple clothes, and spoke plainly. But his mind was like fire, sharp, fearless, and alive. He asked questions that cut straight to the truth. He stopped people in the streets, asking them, what is justice? What is love? What is wisdom? What is a good life? People thought they knew the answers until Socrates destroyed their illusions using only questions. He showed them they did not truly understand what they claimed to know. For Socrates, real wisdom began with honesty, admitting one's own ignorance. Plato was fascinated. He followed Socrates, listened to him, and learned from him not only philosophy, but courage, the courage to think independently. Under Socrates, Plato abandoned his dream of becoming a poet. He threw his early writings into the fire and said, Socrates has awakened my soul. From that moment, he stopped chasing fame and began pursuing truth. But the world does not always love truth. The more people Socrates challenged, the more powerful enemies he made. Many saw him as dangerous, someone who corrupted the youth by teaching them to question their leaders. And so, the leaders of Athens made a decision that would change history. They put Socrates on trial. Socrates was accused of 2 crimes: corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods of Athens. But the real crime, everyone knew, was daring to question authority. The trial was unfair. The judges were biased. The people were afraid of truth. But Socrates refused to beg or lie. He said, "I would rather die than surrender my right to question." He was found guilty and sentenced to death by poison. Plato was there during Socrates' final moments. He watched his teacher drink the cup of hemlock as calmly as one drinks water. Socrates did not cry. He did not run. He spoke to his friends, comforted them, and said his final lesson: the soul is eternal. Death is not the end. Then he closed his eyes and left the world behind, but not his voice. That voice entered Plato's heart and would live forever through him. The death of Socrates shattered Plato, but it also forged him into a warrior of the mind. From that moment, he made a silent promise. The world may silence Socrates, but I will not let his wisdom die. And so, Plato began a journey not of roads, but of ideas, not of battlefields, but of truth. After the death of Socrates, Plato could no longer stay in Athens. The city he once loved now felt cold and empty. Every street reminded him of his teacher. Every voice reminded him of injustice. The people who once praised Socrates now pretended they had never known him. Cowards hid behind silence, and truth was buried by fear. Plato knew if he stayed, he would be watched, maybe even killed. But he did not leave out of fear, he left to prepare. He began a long journey of travel and learning that lasted many years. He went first to Egypt, where civilization was already ancient. There he met priests who taught mathematics not just as numbers, but as a language of nature. He learned geometry by studying the pyramids and temple designs. He explored the idea that the soul was eternal long before Greek philosophers spoke of it. In Egypt, Plato discovered that wisdom lives in many cultures, and truth has many doors. From Egypt, he sailed to the southern regions of Italy, where he studied with the followers of Pythagoras, the philosopher who believed numbers ruled the universe. These thinkers taught Plato that reality is made of patterns and harmony. Music, mathematics, and the motion of the stars were not separate, they were all connected. This belief shaped his view of the universe as one great order guided by invisible laws. He continued to North Africa and Asia Minor, where he learned astronomy, politics, and spiritual philosophy. He spent time alone in temples and mountains, reflecting on the teachings of Socrates. He began writing dialogues, philosophical conversations that explored ideas like truth, justice, courage, and love. He did not write lectures. He did not tell people what to think. Instead, he used questions to awaken minds, just as Socrates had done. After nearly 12 years of travel, Plato returned to Athens. He was no longer a student searching for meaning. He was a philosopher ready to build something meaningful. He bought a piece of land just outside Athens in a quiet grove of olive trees known as Academia. There, he founded a school, the first university in Western history. He called it the Academy. The Academy was unlike any school the world had seen before. There were no grades, no exams, no schedules. Students did not sit quietly in classrooms. They walked, they argued, they searched for truth together. They studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, ethics, and political science. Their goal was not to collect knowledge, but to shape their intellect and character. To Plato, education was not about filling the mind with facts, it was about freeing the soul from ignorance. The Academy soon became famous. People traveled from all over Greece to study there. Wealthy families sent their sons, future leaders, scientists, and thinkers sat under the olive trees discussing the nature of life. And among these students was a 17-year-old boy from Macedon who would one day become one of the greatest thinkers in history, Aristotle. Aristotle was unlike other students. He read constantly, questioned deeply, and remembered everything. While many students repeated what they learned, Aristotle searched for new answers, new ideas. Plato saw in him a powerful mind. He became not only Plato's student, but also his partner in thought, often challenging even his teacher's ideas. He stayed at the academy for 20 years. During this time, Plato wrote some of the most important books in human history. His most famous work, The Republic, explored the meaning of justice and described his vision of the ideal society, one led not by wealthy rulers or popular politicians, but by philosopher kings leaders who love wisdom more than power. Inside The Republic, Plato presents one of his most famous stories, the allegory of the cave. In this story, he describes prisoners who see only shadows on a wall and believe those shadows are reality. One escapes and sees the truth outside, but when he returns to free the others, they refuse to believe him. This story became a symbol of human ignorance and the painful journey toward truth. Plato also wrote the Symposium, a philosophical exploration of love not as simple emotion, but as the force that pushes the soul toward truth. In Apology, he preserved the last speech of Socrates. In Phaedo, he described the immortality of the soul. Every dialogue was a door to deeper reflection, a journey into the human spirit. But Plato was not only a teacher and writer. He wanted to test his ideas in reality. He believed philosophy could guide leaders and transform nations. So he traveled to Syracuse in Sicily to advise a young ruler named Dionysius. Plato hoped to shape him into a philosopher king. But the world of politics was full of jealousy, lies, and cruelty. People at court feared Plato's influence and spread rumors against him. The ruler turned against Plato. And for a time, the philosopher was held as a political prisoner. He barely escaped with his life and returned to Athens wounded, but wiser. That failed experiment taught him something important. Truth is powerful but dangerous. Most people do not want wisdom. They want comfort. They want easy lies. They fear anyone who challenges their beliefs. But Plato did not give up. He returned to the academy and continued teaching, now with deeper strength. He knew that if rulers could not be made wise, perhaps young minds could. And one day, those minds would change the world. Students at the academy began spreading Plato's ideas across Greece and beyond. They became teachers, writers, mathematicians, lawmakers, and advisors to kings. Plato did not build armies or monuments, but he built minds, and minds last longer than empires. As the years passed, Plato grew older but never weaker in spirit. He believed the soul grows stronger through wisdom, and his life became living proof. He was more than a teacher, he was a guide, a builder of thinkers, a guardian of truth. And yet, his greatest mission was still ahead of him. In his later years, Plato dedicated himself to a final and ambitious mission to turn philosophy into a practical system that could guide cities and nations. He believed wisdom must not live only in books or in private conversations. It must live in society. It must guide real people, real laws, and real lives. For without wisdom, power becomes dangerous. Without truth, freedom becomes chaos. Without virtue, nations collapse from within. So Plato began writing what would become his longest and most complex work, The Laws, unlike the Republic, which imagined a perfect society ruled by philosopher kings. The Laws dealt with reality. It was a step-by-step guide for building a just city in the real world, guided not by wealth, fear, or popularity, but by principles of moral education, discipline, and harmony. Plato wrote about how children should be raised, not with comfort and pleasure, but with strong character, self-control, and respect for truth. He wrote about marriage and family, believing that the strength of a city begins in the home. He wrote about crime and punishment not for revenge, but for the correction of the soul. He wrote about music, poetry, and art. arguing that beauty must lift the spirit, not poison the mind. To Plato, a great society was not built by soldiers or kings, it was built by education. While working on the laws, Plato continued to lead the academy. His hair turned white, his steps slow, but his mind remained brilliant and curious. Students still traveled long distances to study under him. Even those who disagreed with him respected him. He was no longer just a philosopher, he had become a legend. Yet despite his greatness, he stayed humble. He continued to listen more than he spoke, question more than he taught, and guide others without forcing his beliefs. But as his wisdom grew deeper, so did the challenges he faced. The academy was full of students with powerful minds, and sometimes powerful minds clash. None challenged Plato more boldly than his greatest student Aristotle. Aristotle admired Plato deeply, but he also questioned him. He did not fully accept Plato's theory of forms, the idea that beyond our physical world exists a higher, perfect reality of unchanging truths. Aristotle believed truth must begin in the physical world, through observation, study, and logic. Where Plato reached upward for truth, Aristotle dug deep into reality. Their differences created a philosophical divide that still shapes human thought today. Their relationship remained respectful, but the student would not remain in the shadow of the teacher forever. After 20 years at the academy, Aristotle left Athens and soon after accepted an invitation that would carry Plato's legacy beyond Greece. He became the personal tutor of a young prince named Alexander of Macedon, the boy who would later be known as Alexander the Great. Through Aristotle, Plato's influence reached the heart of power. When Alexander became king, he carried Greek philosophy across Asia, Egypt, and India. As he conquered lands, he also spread ideas that would shape cultures long after empires fell. Plato did not know it then, but his teachings were already on their way to becoming eternal. During this time, Plato continued to refine his philosophy. He believed the human soul has 3 parts: reason, spirit, and desire. Reason seeks truth, spirit seeks honor and courage, desire seeks pleasure. A good life, Plato believed, is one where reason leads, spirit supports, and desire follows. When desire rules, people become slaves to appetite. When spirit rules, people seek power and domination. Only when reason rules the soul can a person find wisdom, justice, and peace. Plato expanded this belief into a philosophy of leadership. Just as the soul needs order, so does society. He divided society into 3 parts: leaders who use reason, warriors who protect with honor, and workers who build and provide. When each part does its proper work in harmony, society thrives. But when greed, pride, vanity, or ignorance take control, nations fall. Plato also believed something revolutionary, that education is the foundation of justice. He said that the greatest crime in society is ignorance, because ignorance creates fear, corruption, and cruelty. That is why he built the academy not for profit, not for fame, but to awaken minds and prepare future generations to lead with wisdom. To Plato, a mind trained in truth was more powerful than any army. But not everyone welcomed his ideas. Some leaders feared them. Some politicians called him dangerous. Some people mocked philosophy, calling it useless. They wanted entertainment, comfort, and simple answers, not deep thinking. But Plato never stopped teaching. He believed the purpose of life was not to please the crowd, but to seek truth, even if that truth was difficult. As he grew older, Plato often spoke of the soul and its journey beyond life. He believed death was not an end, but a return to a higher truth where the soul remembers everything it once knew. He believed the body dies, but the soul continues forward, carrying its wisdom into eternity. For Plato, philosophy was not just thinking, it was preparation for the immortality of the soul. One evening, after a lifetime dedicated to truth, Plato passed away quietly, some say, while listening to music. Others say while writing. He died as he had lived with peace in his heart and purpose in his mind. He was around 80 years old. There was no grand funeral, no golden tomb. He was buried simply near the academy he had built. But his true monument was not made of stone. It was made of minds he awakened, minds he shaped, minds that continued to search for truth long after his death. Plato died, but his voice did not. His academy continued to teach for 900 years after he passed. His books were copied, hidden, translated, and carried across mountains and seas by scholars determined to protect his wisdom. His ideas survived wars, empires, and even attempts to erase him. Because truth, once spoken, cannot be destroyed. And so began the second life of Plato, not as a man, but as an immortal voice. After Plato's death, his ideas did not fade, they spread like seeds carried by the wind. Some landed close to home, in Greece. Others traveled across continents, through different cultures, languages, and even religions. Plato's thoughts survived because they spoke to the deepest part of human nature, to our search for truth, meaning, and purpose. His words did what no sword or empire could do, they conquered time. After Plato passed away, his nephew Speusippus became the head of the academy. He tried to keep his uncle's teachings alive, and for many generations, students continued to gather under the olive trees to study philosophy. The academy survived wars, political chaos, and the rise and fall of rulers. It became a lighthouse of wisdom in a world full of confusion. But the world was changing. The mighty Roman Empire began to dominate the Mediterranean. The Romans respected Greek culture, but they were builders of roads and armies, not thinkers. They preferred action over reflection. Philosophy, to them, was interesting but not important. Yet even in Rome, Plato found followers. The Roman writer Cicero studied Plato and helped spread his ideas through Latin translations. Although Plato's dialogues were still rare and precious, they quietly entered Roman libraries and slowly influenced writers, teachers, and leaders. But a far greater challenge was coming, one that could erase Plato from history forever. During the 4th century, as Rome began to decline, a new power began to rise: Christianity. The Roman Empire eventually adopted it as the official religion. Many early Christian leaders believed that faith should not mix with philosophy. They feared that questioning could lead to doubt, and doubt could lead to rebellion. To them, Plato's ideas were dangerous, too independent, too questioning, too powerful. In the year 529 CE, the Roman Emperor Justinian made a shocking decision. He closed Plato's academy permanently. After 900 years of teaching, the academy was shut down. Philosophers were forced into exile. Scrolls of Plato's writings were banned, hidden, or destroyed. It seemed as though the voice of Plato would be silenced forever. But truth has a secret: it always finds a way to survive. Some of Plato's students escaped and carried with them copies of his dialogues. They traveled east to Persia and beyond. Meanwhile, something extraordinary was happening in another part of the world. The Islamic Golden Age had begun. In cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba, scholars gathered to study science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. These scholars valued knowledge deeply and translated the works of the Greeks, including Plato, into Arabic. For centuries, while Europe slept in the Dark Ages, Plato was being studied by Muslim philosophers such as Al-Farabi, Avicenna ibn Sina, and Averroes ibn Rushd. They wrote commentaries on Plato's works, expanded his ideas, and preserved his wisdom when Europe had forgotten him. The world owes a great debt to these scholars, for without them, Plato might have vanished. Then, in the 15th century, Europe began to wake up. This period was called the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and knowledge. Scholars searched ancient libraries and discovered forgotten texts, and among these treasures they found Plato again. His words returned like sunlight after a long winter. In Italy, a brilliant scholar named Marsilio Ficino translated all of Plato's works into Latin, the language of educated Europe. He even founded a new Platonic academy in Florence inspired by the original. Painters like Michelangelo, scientists like Galileo, and writers like Shakespeare were influenced by ideas that came from Plato. He was no longer just an ancient Greek, he had become a guide to a new world. But Plato's journey did not end there. In the following centuries, his ideas helped shape the Enlightenment, a revolution of reason and human rights in Europe. Philosophers like Descartes, Kant, and Hegel built on Plato's ideas. Even Einstein echoed Plato when he said, "Reality is merely an illusion," although a very persistent one. Plato's questions continued to live. What is justice? What is the soul? What is truth? What is the purpose of life? These questions would move from Greece to Rome, from Arab scholars to the Renaissance, from Europe to the modern world, and finally into classrooms, universities, and even movies. Today, Plato's writings are studied in over 90 countries and more than 40 languages. His allegory of the cave is taught in schools worldwide. His Socratic method is used in law schools, medical schools, and business schools. His Republic still shapes political debates. His idea that education shapes the soul has influenced every teacher who ever believed in students. His belief that truth matters more than opinion remains the foundation of philosophy. And perhaps the greatest proof of his eternal influence is this: you are listening to his story today, more than 2,000 years after his death, because his voice still matters, because knowledge never dies, because the light of truth continues to pass from one mind to another, from generation to generation, just as he hoped it would. But Plato did not only give knowledge to the world, he gave something even greater: a way of thinking, a way of living, a way of becoming wise, strong, and free. His life holds powerful lessons that can still change your life today. And now we will uncover them. Plato's story is not just history, it is a mirror. When we look into it, we see ourselves. We see our search for purpose, our struggle with doubt, our desire for wisdom, and our fear of truth. That is why Plato never died. His body was buried in Athens, but his ideas took root in the minds of humanity. He did not build monuments, he built thinkers. He did not create armies, he created enlightenment. And that is why, even today, his voice continues to guide those who dare to think. But what exactly did Plato teach us? What wisdom from his life can we carry into our own? His journey gives us timeless lessons for leaders and students, workers and dreamers, the young and the old, lessons for anyone searching for meaning in this world. Plato taught us that the beginning of wisdom is humility. He believed that most people live in illusion. They think they know, but they do not understand. They speak, but their words have no depth. They judge, but they do not see reality. Plato learned from Socrates that true wisdom begins with one sentence: "I do not know, but I want to learn." This is the first key to growth. A closed mind stays small. An open mind becomes powerful. He also taught us that the soul must be trained, just like the body. People spend years training their muscles, their careers, and their status, but how many train their mind and character? Plato believed that the untrained soul becomes weak, ruled by fear, laziness, and pleasure. But the trained soul becomes strong, free, and disciplined. True success does not come from wealth or luck. It comes from the mastery of one's own mind. Plato showed us that true happiness is not found in possessions. Most people chase money, status, and pleasure, but they end up empty. They live in distraction, always wanting more, never satisfied. Plato taught that real happiness comes from the health of the soul, from wisdom, virtue, and inner balance. Happiness is not something we receive. It is something we build. He warned us that silence in the face of injustice is dangerous. Plato watched democracy kill Socrates. He saw how uneducated crowds could be controlled by lies and emotions. That is why he believed that if good people do not speak, bad people rise to power. His warning still echoes in every generation. If you are not careful, ignorance will rule you. Freedom without wisdom becomes a weapon. Plato believed passionately in education, not as a system of tests and grades, but as a way to awaken the soul. He created the academy so that people could learn how to think, not what to think. He believed a great teacher does not give answers, but guides students to discover truth on their own. He believed learning never ends, not at 18, not at 30, not at 80. Education is a lifelong journey. But perhaps his greatest lesson is this: seek truth. No matter the cost. Truth is not comfortable. It is not always welcome. It can hurt. It can isolate you. It may even turn people against you. But to Plato, a life without truth is not life, it is sleep. He believed that every human being must choose live in the cave of shadows or walk toward the light, even if the path is lonely. This is why Plato is eternal. Because every age needs truth, every age needs courage, every age needs wisdom, and every human soul needs a teacher who reminds us, never stop questioning, never stop growing, never stop seeking what is real. If Plato were here today, what would he tell us? He would not tell us what to believe. He would ask, what is your purpose? What do you live for? Do you love truth more than comfort? Do you control your desires? Or do your desires control you? Do you think clearly? Or do you follow the crowd? Do you speak with integrity? Or do you live in fear? Are you awake or still dreaming inside the cave? The story of Plato is not meant to entertain us. It is meant to challenge us, to shake us, to awaken us. His life is a call to rise above ignorance, above shallow thinking, above a life without meaning. He reminds us that the greatest power in the world is not money, armies, or governments. The greatest power is a mind that seeks truth with courage. So ask yourself now, what kind of life will you choose? Will you chase shadows? Or will you seek light? Will you hide behind excuses? Or will you discipline your mind? Will you follow blindly? Or will you lead yourself? Wisdom is not a gift. It is a choice. And today, that choice is in your hands. If this story inspired you, if it helped you think more deeply, if it made you feel stronger, wiser, or more curious, then you are already on the path of philosophy. And remember, you are never alone on this journey. The light of truth has been passed from Socrates to Plato, from Plato to generations of thinkers. And now, it has reached you. If you want more powerful stories that help you improve your English and transform your mind, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Learn English with Sara. Let me know in the comments. What did you learn from Plato's life? I would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay strong, and never stop learning.